In my opinion, this man is the foremost commentator in the world on events critical to all of us. Only a young fella. He's recently written 2 books. The first called America Alone. If you don't read that, because you most probably won't survive to read the second. That'll frighten the tripe out of you. The second's called After America. And he's talking about all the things that you worry about, that you feel you've got no answers to. Questions like leadership, questions like the mess in Europe, Greece, Obama, trillions of dollars of debt, this country going into debt, carbon taxes and all that nonsense. And of course, yes, the Muslim issue. And here in Australia, we've got this country of great richness, great diversity, and we've sunk in the same direction that he is highlighting in his latest book. We have no qualms about spending money we haven't got. He talks about that, spending borrowed money. The great thing, though, about Mark Steyn is he does it all, and you do get a laugh as well. And as I was doing the commercial on the top-end washing machines, he then had something to say. Good morning and welcome to our country again.
Hey, great to be back, Al. Yeah, I was talking. You were distinguishing between the top-loading washers and I think the side-loading ovens, and I said, get those top-loading washers from Westinghouse while you can, because in the U.S. they want to ban them on environmental grounds, and the idea being the front-loading washer, where you have to bend down and put the clothes in, destroys the planet more slowly than the front-loading washer. But so they want to move from the top-loading to the front-loading. But that's an interim stage, because as you well know, Alan, the environmentalists would really prefer it if you were washing your clothes down in the river, beating them dry on the rocks, while the native women sing their traditional eco-chants. And that's a nice community ritual. We need to move back to that sustainable model, I think.
Fantastic. Let's get serious, not all the time. But you make the point earlier in this latest book, After America, and this is the staggering stat, that America's 111th Congress, 2009 to 2011, ran up more debt than the first 100 combined.
Right.
And you make the simple point, you can't go on allowing the debt to rise forever and ever relative to GDP.
No, and really the entire Western world is engaging in a kind of synchronized suicide here. And the difference with America is that if Greece goes over the cliff, it's a few rinky-dink billions here and there. America, the U.S. government spends $4 trillion, of which it borrows $2 trillion. And at a certain point, there is just not enough money on the planet to fund that level of government waste, which is what it is. It is waste for the most part.
And you take this a step forward. This is what's fascinating. Mark Steyn takes this a step further, because you have to pay the interest on the debt. And a whole heap of that money is being borrowed from China. And you make the point in the book that the interest on your debt, the interest that you pay on the debt, we pay more on the debt than China, Britain, France, Russia, Japan, Germany, Saudi Arabia, India, Italy, South Korea, Brazil, Canada, Australia, Spain, Turkey and Israel spend on their militaries combined.
Right. In other words, just the interest payments on American debt will be covering the entire cost of the Chinese military by about the middle of this decade. Right now, the interest payments on the debt cover about 80% of the cost of the People's Liberation Army of China. There is no precedent in this for history. When the Roman Empire slid into collapse, they hadn't instituted a system of government whereby Roman taxpayers were funding the entire costs of the Visigoth military. There's simply no precedent for this anywhere in history, of a declining power funding the rise of its successor.
So we're constantly being told, and you say this in the book, of China's massive military build-up. New missiles, upgraded bombers, aircraft carriers, research and whatever. So America is borrowing so much money from China that the interest that Americans are paying will pay for the Chinese military build-up.
Yeah, this is just the interest. This is where you get your credit card statement at the end of the month, and you can't actually pay down any of the debt.
No.
But you can just stay current on the monthly interest charge. The monthly interest charge on America's debt is equivalent to about 20%. By about 2015, it'll be equivalent to about 20% of all money that the government spends will just be going in interest
That's right.
charges.
And by take that date, 2015, you say in the book that the People's Liberation Army, which is the largest employer on the planet,
right,
will be entirely funded by US taxpayers.
Yeah, yeah, and this is amazing, because if you think about the cost of the American military. I was with Lynn Allison, the former senator for the Australian Democrats,
yeah.
and you know what she's like. She said, said to me as we were leaving, America just spends a ridiculous amount of money on its military. Well, as ridiculous as she may think the amount of money you spend on your military is, if you're spending even more on that just on debt servicing, on debt interest, at least when you spend money on the military, you've got an unmanned drone and an aircraft carrier and a couple of machine guns to show for it. When you're just spending it on interest, on debt interest to profoundly hostile powers, that's a far bigger waste of money.
And take it a step further, because you're saying if that interest that you are paying, and I think the figure you quoted was 5.7%, if the interest went to 5.7, they could quadruple their military strength, and America would be paying for it.
Yep. And this is something relevant to Australia. Australia in the modern era has grown up with the Pacific Ocean as a kind of American lake, and we assume that because it has been that in living memory, it'll always be that. If you look, for example, at just certain bits of Britain's old Indian Empire, in Sri Lanka, in Burma, in Bangladesh, China is refitting those ports there for a kind of superhighway to Middle Eastern oil. In other words, we've gone within living memory. We've gone from Britain's Indian Empire to China's new superhighway. The world moves faster than you think.
Absolutely. And you say you can go from big government to busted government.
Yeah.
And if you keep going this way, there'll be no American dream.
No, and I think the Western world has done a terrible thing to its children and grandchildren, because they are going to be growing up with absolutely crippling debt burdens. They are going to live poorer, meaner, smaller, more vicious, more violent lives where they won't have the opportunity to fulfill their economic potential.
And then you take the extra point about losing this whole entrepreneurial spirit, and you say that just as the late Roman Empire was no longer an aqueduct building culture, we're no longer a dam building one. Here in our country, it's raining cats and dogs, and we aren't harvesting one drop of that water.
No. And because eventually, I think the progressive left, I mean, progressive is such a funny word, because they're actually not just with washing machines, they're at war with progress in the broader. I mean, the old left built the Hoover Dam in the United States, which is spectacular. They're closing dams now. They're blowing them up. They will never build another Hoover Dam. They're more likely to close the Hoover Dam because it doesn't have the world's longest wheelchair ramp going up it to get to the top of it. They're more likely to close it down for that. They are at war with light bulbs. They're at war with oil rigs. They're at war with progress.
Yes, we're worried about building a dam because there might be a cockroach that we'll remove. But the metaphor of this, you say brilliantly, the metaphor is ground zero. And you make the point that here we are years on, and it's still a hole in the ground, except that there is something built there.
Yeah.
Just explain the point you make.
Yeah, as everyone knows, there was a certain unfortunate incident. I don't want to be too provocative, but on September 11th, and where there were big skyscrapers, there's suddenly a hole in the ground. Now, the Empire State Building was put up, start to finish, 18 months in the middle of a depression.
Don't say it so quickly. Empire State Building in the middle of the depression, like our Sydney Harbour Bridge, in the middle of a depression. Empire State Building in 18 months.
Yeah.
We've been going a decade. What have you got?
A decade later, after 9/11, there was a big hole in the ground, and the Mayor Bloomberg and the Governor of New York held the 10th anniversary commemorations over a big hole, in the ground. You know, taking out the towers was something Al-Qaeda did to America. The hole in the ground is something America did to itself, and it tells the world something eloquent and profound about the lack of American will.
Absolutely. And you say in that time, China built the Three Gorges Dam, the largest electricity generating plant in the world. Dubai, which is, we've all been there, built the world's tallest building, this kaleidoscope of offshore islands.
That kind of lily pad thing,
Brazil, you talk about what they've done. But you say, in the ruins of a building reduced to rubble in the name of Islam, all we have is a temple to Islam. We've got that up.
Yeah, yeah, they're the so-called Ground Zero Mosque.
Yes.
There's this fantastic, I mean, really, which fits in with Obama's, I think, absolutely disgraceful apology to Hamid Karzai in Afghanistan over the so-called Quran destruction thing a couple of days ago.
Yes.
There's this imam behind the Ground Zero Mosque in Lower Manhattan who basically travels around the world at the State Department's expense. promoting this incredibly dissembling, dishonest vision of Islam's relationship in the world. Now, I don't begrudge him doing that, but I think he should do it on his own dime.
Absolutely.
The State Department bought thousands and thousands of this guy's books to hand out at receptions in Cairo and all the rest of it. He's an imam on the dole. When you're broke as America, and you can't figure out what to cut, why not start with imams on the dole? An imam should be an imam on his own
But of
time.
course, the Obama apologists say probably the smartest guy ever to become president.
That's right.
What? Eh?
I know.
This is what happens under the smartest guy. Hello. Don't let us have any dumbbells
Oh,
running the joint.
by the way, when they say the smartest guy ever to become president, he went to a fancy prep school. He went to a college in California. He went to Harvard Law. He went, I forget what Columbia. So he had about $1 million worth of elite education, and he becomes a community organizer.
Community organizer.
And I think I say somewhere that. I mean, you look at what Lincoln did with no education.
Would you say Harry
Jackson.
Truman was a haberdasher?
Yeah.
Abraham Lincoln lived 18 months, had 18 months of formal education. Andrew Jackson never went to school. None of these problems existed under those administrations.
Right. And now we have this thing, and he and his wife. You mentioned this before we went on the air. Michelle Obama was getting a $400,000 a year job as a diversity outreach officer for the University of Chicago hospitals. A job so indispensable that when she became First Lady, they didn't even bother replacing her.
And applied to Princeton, admits her test scores weren't high enough, but she's admitted, and then whinges about having to face discrimination everywhere she went all her life.
But you know, this is what too many people around the developed world do. They think, well, I need to get up in the morning and do a job, so why don't I become a diversity outreach consultant? Why don't I become a community organizer? And so the community organizer goes into the office and sends a memo to the diversity outreach officer across town, and the diversity outreach officer sends a memo back to the community organizer, and they go home at 5 o'clock and kid themselves that they have been engaged in some kind of productive economic activity. And too much of the Western world is like that.
And then we're going to run out of time, though I am going to talk tomorrow to Mark about what the answers to this are. But this awful problem of debt, I mean, you've been through this healthcare mess in America. Just a comment about that. We're in the same sort of boat here. The notion that you can have free healthcare, it's not free, is it?
No, eventually. And I think I have moral qualms about it, because I think this idea that somehow the state should relieve the citizen to worry about stuff like his healthcare and his education, and just free him up so that he can go down to the Apple store and pick out the new model iPod and just figure out what exciting Justin Bieber tunes to put on his iPod. I think you actually turn free-born citizens into the kind of world's wrinkliest teenagers when you do that. There's something actually, aside from the unaffordability of it all, there's something actually that corrodes the essence of what it is to be a free-born citizen in that scenario.
And you're talking about that, aren't you? What is the theme of your message here in America?
I think that the Western world is sliding off the cliff unless we get back to recovering a primal sense of what it means to be responsible for your own destiny. At the moment, we're sort of amusing ourselves to death. And at such engaging in a kind of synchronized suicide, at which the sort of Eurozone and America are both sort of competing as to who can be the brokest and most insolvent entity.
And we seem to be in an awful hurry to catch up.
Yeah, and I think it's quite simply, I mean, Canada and Australia in some ways are the least insane members of the Western world in that respect, but Canada and Australia, when America and the Eurozone slide off the cliff, Australia will go down with it.
And we'll talk about how we get out of that mess tomorrow.